For 70 years, the dollar's been the superpower of the monetary system. Despite talk of the yuan's rise, the primacy of the greenback pretty much goes unchallenged. As a means of payment, a store of value and a reserve asset, nothing can touch the US dollar. But as America's economic supremacy fades, is it? The primacy of the dollar looks unsustainable. I don't know who's writing this stuff, but certainly others might disagree. The dollar may have no peers right now, but what does it mean for the future? Is it a future that is dominated by cyber currencies, for example? In Joburg, interest rate derivative specialist from RMB, Eerenstein, and in our Cape Town studio, I'm joined by Rashaad Tayob from Abax Investments. Rashaad, let's start with you. The US economy's dominance is threatened. Maybe it felt like it a year or two ago, but that feels like a year or two ago story.
Yes, I think if you look at the importance of the dollar over the last 5 years, the obituary of the dollar has been written for 20 years. In fact, The Economist seems to write that similar sort of article every 2 or 3 years. But in the last 20 years, in the last 5 years, the dollar has only become more important. And that's because there's no credible alternative. The euro, at points in 2012, we were uncertain whether the euro would even continue to exist. We'd go home on Friday and not know whether it would fall apart over the weekend. So as a store of value, the euro hasn't been able to come through and take its place.
And anybody believing a year or two ago, when China was believed to be growing between 7 and 8%, that the yuan would be the next store of value, well, you've been shown the vulnerability of the yuan in recent times, because occasionally the government in China can simply choose to devalue that currency if it sees need to stimulate its own backyard.
Yes, so I think that highlights the importance that it's not for reserve currency or a global currency. It's not necessarily the size of the economy which is important, but it's the credibility of the economic and monetary system. So we know the economy of China has grown by 10% per annum. It's huge. It's increased massively over the last 5, 10, 20 years, but they still have this very closed system. So they're running a pegged currency. You can't just go into China and buy stocks and bonds. There's qualified investors. There's quota systems. So they have this complex financial system, and you cannot be a reserve currency if you're running this. You cannot force that change through. It has to evolve over time.
Eerenstein in Johannesburg, would you concur that the United States is far more resilient than perhaps it was given credit for in the last couple of years, and that China perhaps is less dominant or less domineering in the short term?
No, I absolutely agree. I think the US, when you look at its monetary system, it's freely tradable. Anyone can buy assets, bonds, shares, can buy the currency, sell the currency. So it's freely traded, and the market determines what that value is. And I think for a currency, a reserve currency, that is it's an absolute necessity. It's a non-negotiable item, that. And if you look at the US going forward, its economy is still exceptionally productive. They've got a population base that, albeit not shrinking, it's growing. You've got strong consumers there. The economy and the skill set that you have there, and the technology that comes out of the US, is by far greater than any other economy that you have on the planet. And I think that's why the US will be resilient.
And so the contention by the economists that the American economy's supremacy is fading is perhaps, I don't know, it's a British perspective, maybe it's wishful thinking on their part, but America's economic supremacy is far from fading. If anything, it seems to be entrenching itself even further.
Yes, I think when you ask anyone on the planet what's the reserve currency, and it's their perception. You look at the Eurozone, and why will the euro potentially not fail, is the fact that when you look at the youth in the Eurozone, they don't understand what a lira is, they don't understand what a drachma is. It's the older populations that get it. And when you say, oh, well, would you live without the euro? And they say, what are we going to do with it? So I think when you look at anyone else on the planet, they're going to say, what is a reserve currency? And it will be the US dollar, certainly under this monetary system. I think monetary system, fiat currency as a whole, is going to be around for a while, and it's until that credibility fails. So when someone presents a US dollar and they say, I'm not willing to part with my goods or services for that currency, that's where we will see something different happen.
The moment a border guard at a border somewhere on the African continent who's looking for a bit of lubrication to get you through in a suitcase of stuff perhaps you shouldn't be taking across the border, Rashaad, says, I'd rather have rands than those dollars, thank you. You know the dollar's dominance is dead.
Yeah, but you don't foresee that happening for a while. In fact, in the emerging market space, we've actually gone backwards in the last 5 years. So I think the idea is not necessarily try to forcefully remove the dollar, but improve the stability and the resilience and the credibility of your own monetary systems, and the importance of the dollar and the fragility will tend to fade away. But if you look at the emerging market currency index, we've lost 40% of value in the last 4 years. I mean, that's a dramatic destruction in credibility because people don't think that it's a store of value to have an Indian currency.
The US went through a destruction of credibility phase as well. I mean, 2008 through until fairly recently, when jobs numbers in the US recovered to the point that was pretty hard to argue against. Wage rates were starting to improve, where growth in the US is sitting at 3.5%. However, there is just this niggle, and that is a nice lady called Janet Yellen, who stands in front of the world and dominates the global markets conversation for a couple of hours every month, when she doesn't raise interest rates the next time because she doesn't have sufficient faith in the American economy to raise interest rates. That strikes me as a vulnerability.
But I think you have to remember that currencies are not an absolute game, they're a relative game. When a currency doesn't appreciate like a stock can go up in value, it goes up against a different currency. And I think there you're looking at the relative position of the US relative to Europe, relative to emerging markets, China and Japan, and you have to admit that the US is in a much stronger position. On an absolute basis, they're struggling to generate, the growth in jobs has come through, but it's not super strong. The wage growth is actually quite muted, so the earnings are not coming through to the man on the street. So there are limitations. It's not a phenomenal growth where interest rate hikes are a given, but on a relative basis, they're doing much better.
On a relative basis. Andre in Johannesburg, give me a sense, please, on your belief or lack of belief, or your concerns, your thoughts around the idea of cyber currencies. Again, a year or two ago, the dollar going through an issue of self-confidence, or maybe markets having an issue of confidence with the dollar, and suddenly these cyber currencies start emerging. Is there ever going to be a credible threat from them?
Well, that's an interesting point. I think when you look at, and it's a point that I alluded to earlier, certainly under this monetary system where fiat currency is printed and handed out, I think the dollar will remain strong. But currency regimes change. We went from a gold standard to fiat currency, and it's about time that we end up probably going and revisiting some form of monetary change. And is cyber currency the next one? Yeah, possibly. Has it kind of reached there yet? By no means has it. And I think we'll probably have to talk about this in probably 10, 15 years.
Andre. Yeah. It's fine to theorize, of course, about cyber currencies, but governments have got one thing in common. They like to hold on to the nation's purse strings. The moment you say, oh yeah, no, we could make e-bucks the official currency of South Africa. They're out of your stable. You guys would be pleased with that, wouldn't you? It would send the Reserve Bank going completely mad.
No, sure. But again, if you're faced with a situation where credibility for that particular currency, and let's use the US dollar, where I'm not willing to part with my goods and services in order to accept that dollar, there's by no means can anyone then justify and say, right, fiat currency is now falling by a wayside, and there needs to be some form of money that has to change hands, and that has to be either fiat currency, or we go back to something like a benchmark gold standard. But again, these are things that will materialize over a very long period of time.
All right, let's go to you then, Rashaad. And again, the word is confidence. Yes. It is all about confidence, and your argument that it's all a relative game. If I think on the US dollar it says, "In God we trust." If in the United States, or maybe in the rest of the world, if in America we trust kind of falls off the tangible value of that dollar, that is the only point in which we're going to get any potential competitor to the US dollar.
Yes, I mean, from a cyber currency perspective, I think their credibility has already been destroyed. Bitcoin went from $10 to $1,000 and back to $100. So when you're talking currencies, it's a means of exchange, but it's also a store of value. But where's your store of value if you lose 90%? So there's no credibility in people holding Bitcoin.
You talk to the cryptocurrency guys, you say, all right, how many of you get paid in your particular cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
How many of you get paid 1,000 bitcoins a month? Not one of them.
But it's an excellent means of exchange, because I think the way the system is set up, where the cost of transacting, especially globally, is so high, you need someone to come in and disrupt that and enable you to send dollars, send $1 million and pay 0.1%. You need a means of doing that, and I think cryptocurrencies or something similar has a way. But I don't think you can replace the credibility of the U.S. diversified and the largest economy in the world with a credible monetary and economic system and replace it with anything else or cryptocurrency.
Do you agree with Andre's contention that we actually do need to revisit the monetary system again? We went from gold standard to fiat currencies. These things evolve, or do they come? Do we need a revolution in currencies?
What I think is that, as the economist points out, the fact that we're all highly dependent on the dollar makes the system fragile. But the way to get around that is for other countries like us in emerging markets to increase the stability and the credibility of our own system through sound economic and sound monetary policies. And in that way, you'll get a natural drift away from a dependence on dollar. You don't want to be, you definitely don't want countries borrowing in dollar, and when their currency depreciates, you get this debt inflation. So we've seen that throughout Africa. We saw that in the 97 Asian crisis. So you want to reduce this dollar dependence by improving the mechanics of your own economy, and it will naturally drift away. The fragility will disappear.
I couldn't agree with you more. Andre, a comment on that? One looks at Zimbabwe, for example, and the dollarization of the Zimbabwean economy. You can use whatever currency you like. If you don't have the right structures in place in your own economy, you're doomed to start off with.
No, I think when we look at changes in monetary systems, I think we've got to be very careful and say, right, yes, under fiat currency as it is, yes, we can all introduce and we can all improve our economic policies, and we can all then have a rival that comes out, whether it be SDRs or whether it be another form of a dollar, or whether it be a euro basket, whatever that is. But the point is, when monetary systems fall flat, and again, it could be a dollar, it could be euro, it could be the fact that rand could be the reserve currency. It's at that point in time where people then have to look at cyber currencies. And maybe it's not only cyber currency, but it's a mix. Maybe yes, you've got the Bitcoin, or you've got the Fed that controls or has the ability to do it. All I'm saying is that when you look at a monetary mechanism and how it changes and evolves over time, it's going to be very easy to kind of move forward 15 years and look back and say, why didn't we see this coming? I think the point is that as it evolves, I think you'll see that there will be improvements made. So the Bitcoin that you saw 2 years ago may not be the same Bitcoin that's there 10 years from now. That's kind of the point that I'm making. But at this point in time, with fiat currencies the way that we are, there's absolutely no way we can step away from the strength of the dollar.
The one thing you can say about the future is it's far from dull. I can't wait to see what happens. Interest rate derivative specialist from RMB, Andre Eerenstein, and in our Cape Town studio, Rashaad Tayob from Abax Investments. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Andre in Johannesburg, for joining us as well. And to you for watching the MoneyMakers this evening here on CNBC Africa. Thanks for watching. Until next time, good night.